Hello, everybody. We are Group 2, also known as the Busy Bees, and this is our PSP Group Decision and Process presentation. For our provocative statement, our group chose to consider the idea that all United States citizens should have the right to vote regardless of their criminal history. Once we settled on a statement to analyze, our group proposed 4 research questions that we included in our group norms paper. These research questions were: what is the current logic behind why current or ex-criminals are not allowed to vote? So essentially, we just wanted to know what the background was to the current laws that don't allow ex-criminals to vote. The second question we had is if taking away the right for criminals to vote is against the Constitution or not, or if it is simply more of an ethical argument. So we wanted to know, again, if there was a legal basis or an ethical basis as to why the current rules exist. The third question we had was, what are the negative effects of disenfranchising criminals? And then finally, our fourth question was, how much influence could current or ex-criminals have on an election if they were given the right to vote? So essentially, with that question, we just wanted to figure out what the result of changing the laws would be. So before we get into the rest of the presentation, I want to share a quick outline of how it's going to go. So after this, Maddie and Nadia are going to be discussing our decision, in which we identified 5 key perspectives that fully encompass the entirety of the argument, both for and against allowing criminals to vote. And then finally, after that, Kate's going to offer some insight that we learned from our group process. She's going to identify some key lessons we learned, some of the things we went through, and how we grew throughout this experience.
So the first perspective that we want to share and agreed was important was that disenfranchisement laws should be saved for only the most serious crimes. On the slide, we cite 2 papers that discuss this, and we believe it is important because data provides evidence that society does agree with this. So law should be representative of what society wants and believes. However, with current disenfranchisement laws, they are not representative of societal views, but instead support the idea that ex-felons should not be able to vote. Mansa found that 80% said they supported enfranchisement for general ex-felons. However, when looking at specific type of criminal offense, there is less support. For those who have committed violent crimes and have served their sentence, 66% support allowing them to vote. Though this is lower than the previous 80% mentioned, it is still majority. And finally, we believe that the truth is that the data finds that most favor this idea, and it was a pretty well done study that looked at 48 states. Second, we believe that there is a lot of research indicating disenfranchisement laws disproportionately affect racial minorities. So these 3 sources discuss that those arrested are disproportionately people of color. Thus, disenfranchisement laws strongly affect members of racial minority groups. To state some data that we found from these sources, so blacks are 4 times more likely to lose voting rights than the average American, and states with greater number of minority citizens are significantly more likely to prevent those convicted of crimes from voting. In 7 states, 1 in 4 black men are affected by felony disenfranchisement laws, and over 2 million African American citizens permanently cannot vote. So this is one thing that our group knew was an issue, but we were surprised to learn how prominent of an issue it was and the extent to how it affected minority groups. We also all concluded that this was one of the stronger points that we saw in many articles throughout our research. So there's a lot of data that backs it up, and so we believe it to be true.
The third perspective from our research pronounces that democratic theories and ideals are undermined when voters are excluded from elections. Stripping voting rights is unnecessary and does not serve those who should be protected by the social contract of democracy that upholds equal representation of all. These articles argue that barring people from voting causes societal outcasting, and that this practice fundamentally disagrees with the philosophy of democracy. Additionally, felon disenfranchisement opposes the idea of rehabilitation of actions and further alienates criminals from their communities. This information has led us to conclude the truth that democracy requires input from all citizens of a government, and laws that exclude certain voters counteract these ideals of democracy. This next perspective from our sources represents one of the dissenting opinions of granting voting rights to all regardless of criminal history. According to this perspective, criminals could use their votes to negatively impact existing laws. This perspective also upholds that only people who are able to follow the rules of society should be able to vote. 3 of our sources included this perspective. It is argued that felons may use their newly given right to vote to weaken existing criminal laws. Additionally, these articles argue that criminals require extensive assimilation back into society, and giving immediate voting rights upon restitution would require constant supervision. Furthermore, the article by Mower concludes that overturning voter disenfranchisement laws would present problems in keeping track of those who can and can't vote, as well as having updated information on their sentences and their restitution if it was made in full. The truth that we glean from this perspective includes that although there are many that support overturning voter disenfranchisement laws, this idea does not represent the attitudes of all U.S. citizens, and overturning these laws may also lead to difficulties that would require a reevaluation of the current system. Our last perspective from our research is that the right to vote is a fundamental human right. The literature that we have examined maintains that without giving everyone the right to vote, equal opportunity practices are diminished and deemed insignificant if not everyone is given the same ability to express their political voice. Additionally, other human rights organizations around the world argue that if you don't give someone the right to vote, regardless of criminal history, it is a human rights violation. However, from this perspective, we found a truth to be that not all people have equal opportunities in the U.S., and this includes the right to vote. To summarize our group's perspective, as we mentioned before, our group firmly believes that all people should have the right to vote regardless of criminal history. Given our wide variety of sources and extensive research, we believe this to be true when considering who is affected the most by disenfranchisement laws and the history of inequality surrounding these laws. What we found to be the most surprising was the extent to which minorities were excluded from voting in the U.S. and this connection of felon disenfranchisement to history of exclusionary acts against people of color, such as the Jim Crow laws. Lastly, we found it surprising that there is an overall affirmative support for the abandonment of felon disenfranchisement laws from the U.S. population. Given the current political climate, we were expecting to see the opposite results in our research and actually had a difficult time finding dissenting opinions to our topic. The questions that our group still has about our topic would include what current laws or political agendas might be overturned if felon disenfranchisement laws were deemed unconstitutional. Some of our sources pointed to the targeting of current criminal policies. However, would there be other areas of interest within this population? And lastly, what systems would need to be implemented to make the abandonment of felon disenfranchisement laws successful?
In terms of our process, we identified 3 main learnings from our team project. Overall, this was a great group experience, and although it was different to work with a group that was based solely from an online class, it definitely gave us a new way of looking at how to approach group work. The first thing that we learned in the process is that communication is key. Whether that be early and frequent communication, it's important to know where others are at in their work, to be able to give updates to your team members, and to make sure that the work is cohesive. Given that our group was assigned a week before the first assignment was due, our group members felt the pressure to form and norm right away, kind of skipping that storming stage. For me, as someone who likes to plan, I tried to initiate a dialogue between members to introduce ourselves and figure out what needed to get done. Although we weren't able to all meet as a group during the first week because of conflicting schedules, group members understood what needed to be done within that short time constraint. This dialogue has continued throughout all the group work that we have completed, as well as contributing different ideas and opinions, which has been great. The most important thing is that this dialogue has allowed everyone to respect each other's opinions and evaluate them in terms of the goal of the project. Overall, we've been able to evaluate the project across our different assignments and evaluate the progress to make sure that the work is cohesive. Our second leadership learning that we found was that people work at different paces, and it's important to realize that everyone might complete their work in different ways and on different timelines. While one person may prefer to work ahead. Some may prefer and feel comfortable leaving it until the last minute. As someone who likes to work in advance, I really prefer to get work done as soon as possible. However, I realize that some of my group members, we all lead different lives and have different ways on how we prefer to do our work. By setting the schedule for the initial group norms paper, I was able to lay out when certain components of projects needed to be done. That way, this helped the group to know what needed to be done when and really laid out the timeline for our group process. The bottom line is that if something wasn't done by the deadline, then there would be a problem. But besides that, people could do their work on their own time and at their own leisure. Additionally, it was important to consider everyone's personal leadership journey, their experiences, and their own insights that they bring to the team. This was especially evident when creating our group norms paper to identify the strengths of the different group members and how they would best fit into different roles for the project. The last major leadership learning that we identified is that empathy leads to understanding. While everyone has different schedules and commitments, it's very important to be empathetic. Our group, for example, is very busy and diverse. Chase is a baseball player at the University of Minnesota team, and Maddie works night shifts at a clinic. This is important to recognize because everyone leads a different life and has different priorities. Before getting upset or speaking too soon on an issue, it's really important to imagine oneself in another's shoes. As busy college students, we all have responsibilities, whether that be with families, classes, clubs, organizations, or volunteering. We all have different things that we are passionate about and work towards outside of the classroom. This leads back to the idea of creating a dialogue to really understand everyone's situation, what they need to succeed, and where they might need support from the group. Overall, we believe that communication, empathy, and recognizing differences between people really helped us with this project and will help us in the future as future leaders.
3 connections that we have made to class concepts throughout this project include, first, that systems of oppression and power are evident in today's society, and in this case through tactics such as voter disenfranchisement. Given the overwhelming impact that these laws have on racial minority groups, voter disenfranchisement places people of color even further away from achieving social equity. Secondly, leaders must observe situations from multiple perspectives to gain true understanding of their followers' needs. Political leaders may not be able to understand the impact that voter disenfranchisement has on communities of color, which makes them unsuccessful in identifying the needs of their constituents. Likewise, in a group project process, leaders must communicate their needs and respect the differences of other group members. Lastly, successful groups require representation of varying strengths. As Kate mentioned before, each person brings different strengths to the table, and the most successful groups show a wide variety of talents and perspectives to achieve desired outcomes.
With that, that is the conclusion of the Busy Bees PSP group decision and process presentation. If you have any questions about our decision or our processes, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us. Thank you.